On this Friday night, COVID-19, the risk of its spread now upgraded to the highest level.
This is a reality check.
What all countries, including Canada, are being warned to prepare for.
Wake up, get ready. This virus may be on its way.
As fears drive down global stock markets even further. Plus, why we're not getting a true picture of how many people are infected. Trying to end the impasse, fresh talks between Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs and government ministers. A Global News exclusive, how Canadian terrorism offenders are leaving prison still radicalized. And from working the checkout to winning a jackpot. The young supermarket employee bagging a windfall.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Countries and companies around the world are focused on COVID-19 tonight as new cases emerge. More than 50 countries have confirmed cases of the new coronavirus now, and the World Health Organization has raised its alert to the highest level. In Iran, there are reports from hospitals of a big spike in deaths, more than 200. That is 6 times higher than the official death toll from the Iranian Health Ministry. Many believe it's downplaying what's really going on. Mass disinfection is underway at mosques and on public transit. Schools are closed for 3 days, and many flights to and from Iran have been canceled. The World Health Organization now admits we are on the precipice of a pandemic.
This is a reality check for every government on the planet. Wake up, get ready. This virus may be on its way and you need to be ready. You have a duty to your citizens, you have a duty to the world to be ready.
We'll get to what Canadian public health officials are doing to ramp up the response here in just a moment, but we begin with the stock market. It went into a tailspin again today across Asia, Europe, and here in North America. The TSX closed down 454 points, and Wall Street suffered its worst week since the financial crisis of 2008. The Dow Jones tanked today, closing a staggering week with a loss of about 3,500 points in just 5 days. It's all fueled by massive sell-offs and rising uncertainty as multinational companies downgrade their financial forecasts. Production at factories has slowed. That's paralyzing supply chains globally. And as more people stay home, stop traveling, and limit their activities to contain the spread, the pain will get worse. And tonight in the U.S., the world's second largest economy, the first hotspot for the virus is emerging. Jackson Proskow reports.
California is now the focus of COVID-19 containment in the U.S., where 8,400 people are being monitored for symptoms after a single person tested positive despite having no obvious connection to the virus.
This is a random individual in a community of 450,000 people.
The woman was admitted to hospital not far from a U.S. Air Force base where Americans were quarantined after their repatriation from Wuhan, China. A whistleblower has come forward to say staff on the base who greeted those Americans were not properly trained or protected.
Now that we're seeing it in essentially every continent, there's certainly, I think, a new attention being paid to this infection.
The lack of testing has hampered any clear sense of how widespread COVID-19 may be in the U.S. There are only a limited number of test kits. Many have been deemed faulty or unreliable.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
Yet the Trump administration continues to downplay the risk.
The reason you're saying so much attention to it today is that they think this is going to be what brings down the president.
Even as public health officials have warned the situation remains grave. Amazon instructed their employees to halt all non-essential travel. Google restricted travel to Europe and Asia after an employee in Zurich tested positive. Around the world, jittery markets continued their dive over fears of a crippling economic slowdown. In New York, the Dow and S&P racked up their worst week since the 2008 global financial crisis, wiping out trillions of dollars in wealth. While the U.S. Food and Drug Administration warned of the first supply chain shortages for at least one prescription medication. The U.S. plans to drastically improve its testing capacity within the next week, and that has officials bracing for more bad news. A sudden surge in detected cases could drastically change the outlook for the epidemic and further rattle already shaky markets. Dawna?
Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. We keep reporting the number of confirmed cases as a measure of how this virus is spreading, but it's not giving the full picture. The only way to confirm a case is to test. No test, and you potentially leave human-to-human transmission unchecked. Disease mapping can predict what's coming. Experts at Imperial College London use Singapore as a benchmark. It was quick to impose restrictions on travel from China. It has a strict quarantine regime, and it's traced all contacts with infected people. It only has 98 confirmed cases and no deaths. So based on what happened there and looking at travel patterns from the origin of the outbreak in China, they estimate about 2/3 of cases worldwide remain undetected.
Italy, we think there are many thousands of cases probably distributed across the country now. And similarly and certainly in Iran, probably tens of thousands, if not more.
Many are likely people with mild or possibly no symptoms. But look at China. Some there are developing serious respiratory illnesses and dying. Not just the elderly and people with underlying health conditions. The mortality rate is uncertain, but COVID-19 does appear to be more deadly than the seasonal flu, and no one has immunity to it. And that's why Canada is now moving towards disease surveillance mode, not just passively waiting for people to show up at the hospital feeling ill, but actively looking for cases. Canada's chief public health officer has said it's similar to systems used to monitor influenza. And today, Ontario's health minister stressed the risk here is low, but preparedness is ramping up.
We actually have a command center that is set up. We are prepared. Our hospitals are prepared. We have the protective equipment we need to protect our health officials, and we are ready to move immediately should the situation change at any time.
There are 15 confirmed cases of COVID-19 here in Canada. All the most recent cases are in people who recently returned from Iran. The numbers are being updated by countries around the globe by the hour. Right now, there are more than 84,000 confirmed cases. South Korea's daily increase in cases has now surpassed that of mainland China. And Iran and Italy appear to be linked to the newest cases being detected far beyond their borders. Goomansingh on the spread and the risk.
Nigeria has dealt with highly infectious diseases, Ebola, malaria, cholera, and now COVID-19, as an Italian man remains in hospital outside of the capital.
He's in high spirit, he's doing well, and we expect that he will continue to do well.
The 44-year-old recently arrived from Milan via Istanbul. Nigeria is home to more than 190 million people. A virus there can spread quickly inside the country and beyond.
The government of Nigeria, through the Federal Ministry of Health, has been strengthening measures to ensure an outbreak in Nigeria is controlled and contained quickly.
Authorities are getting a clearer picture of the web of infection. Italian cases are connected not only to Nigeria, but Mexico, Spain, Brazil, among others. Canadian cases can be traced to Iran. And then there's South Korea. A religious sect there has asked the public to stop persecuting followers. More than half of South Korean cases emerged after church members traveled to Wuhan. The World Health Organization is vigilant but still restrained in its language.
If we say there's a pandemic of coronavirus, we're essentially accepting that every human on the planet will be exposed to that virus. The data does not support that.
Meanwhile, as cases mount and the concern grows, COVID-19 has claimed the life of the first Briton, a man who had been quarantined on the Diamond Princess cruise ship. Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Now to the disruption rail blockades are having in this country. A second day of talks is underway in BC between government leaders and some hereditary chiefs. At issue is a dispute over a natural gas pipeline running through Wet'suwet'en territory. A resolution there could lead to the blockades elsewhere coming down. Sarah MacDonald is in Smithers, BC tonight. Sarah, how are the talks going?
Dawna, we are told progress is being made behind these closed doors, where a select group of Indigenous leaders, lawyers, and government officials entered into a second day of talks this morning, ready for constructive and at times difficult dialogue. A second day of high-stakes talks between government officials and Indigenous leaders, taking place at a more secure location Friday, as all sides return to the table on the heels of an emotional and momentous meeting on Thursday.
The entire nation needs to be represented, not just a small fraction.
I wanted to find out what's going on because a lot of stuff's been happening with the protests and we're not involved.
Involving matriarchs and chiefs, both for and against a contentious natural gas pipeline project.
I just think people are aware climate change is happening, and that's what I think it's all about.
Driving a wedge, not only through Wet'suwet'en Nation,
I stand where I want. I'm in Ungwahuma territory.
but all of Canada too.
I think we're not starting from scratch, and I think that that there's a lot of work that's been done.
We're willing to roll up our sleeves and get to the complex and difficult issues.
The meetings are said to be productive, but not easy.
The parties are very much engaged, as are their teams. The amount of work being done right now is substantive, and important.
And especially so for the Wet'suwet'en people, feeling the impact of an internal complex dispute dividing this powerful nation.
Where they're putting that pipeline is, that's where our fish spawn. And I don't know how our community is going to take it when there's no more fish.
Families and friendships fractured, with livelihoods on the line.
I understand about wanting to save the environment, but also understand that people need to feed their families.
As a hiatus on work and police patrols on Indigenous land stretches into a second day, along with difficult dialogue in an ongoing and arduous process. And no time frame has been given at this point for how long this process could last. Government officials telling us they are prepared to stay as long as it takes, which could mean throughout the weekend. Dawna.
Okay, Sarah MacDonald in Smithers, BC. Thank you. This conflict over a natural gas pipeline and the protests that have sprung up supporting the hereditary chiefs have put three promises made by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on a collision course: meeting climate targets, growing the economy by exporting natural resources, and achieving reconciliation with Indigenous people. Our chief political correspondent David Akin joins me. David, is this a challenge not just for Trudeau, but for the premiers too?
Oh, most definitely, Dawna. We have seen multiple polls over the last few days that show very few Canadians approve of the way some of the key non-Indigenous political players involved in this are handling things. Just 1 in 5, or 21% of those surveyed earlier this week by the Angus Reid Institute, said Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was doing a good job handling this, 21%. It's about as bad for some premiers. Just 18% approve of the way BC's John Horgan was handling the crisis. Just 15% said Ontario's Doug Ford was doing a good job handling the blockade crisis in his province. The big problem here, particularly for Trudeau and Horgan, is raised expectations that we can have it all. We can have the resource development. We can have effective climate action, all while moving forward on reconciliation. And voters have looked at the last few weeks and have concluded those expectations, Dawna, are not even close to reality.
They are very high expectations. There are people, David, who believe that reconciliation is now dead. Others are still hopeful. How much have the last few weeks affected reconciliation?
Well, I don't think it's dead, but I think it is definitely going to be much more difficult to achieve. I mean, even within Indigenous communities themselves, we have seen fractures over reconciliation. We have some Indigenous leaders who've been saying these blockades are an overreaction that will set back the task of reconciliation. Of course, it's a task that succeeds only if there is goodwill on all sides. And sadly, we are also seeing a sharp increase in racist anger aimed at Indigenous Canadians, both in confrontations in person at the barricades and just all over social media. Some news organizations have even had to shut down comment boards on stories about the Wet'suwet'en or Tyendinaga because of the volume of racist reaction. The bottom line, a whopping 80% of Canadians now say these blockades are damaging the relationship between Indigenous peoples and other Canadians. Reconciliation is going to be tough, Dawna.
So much work to do. David Akin in Ottawa, thanks. A Global News exclusive investigation coming up. Canadian terrorism offenders released from prison, unreformed and still radicalized. Now to a global news investigation. Over the past few years, about 130 Canadians have left the country to join terrorist groups such as the so-called Islamic State or Al-Qaeda. Some have died, others have been convicted for their crimes and served time in prison. The parole board reports obtained by Global News suggest that when some Canadian terrorism offenders are released, they're still radicalized. And as Jeff Semple reports, they still pose a threat.
The rise of the so-called Islamic State a few years ago saw a number of Canadians join their fight. Carlos Larmond from Ottawa was convicted in 2016 of attempting to join ISIS in Syria, sentenced to 7 years and transferred to Canada's highest security prison. Last year, his parole board said Larmond had not shown significant indications of change, attempting to radicalize other offenders, and posed a high risk to public safety. But despite those concerns, last December, Larmond was released from prison.
We have somebody who has shown no signs of having abandoned the ideology that got him convicted in the first place.
And he's not alone. Larmond is one of 5 terrorism convicts freed from Canadian prisons last year, 4 of whom, according to parole boards, still posed a threat.
We haven't been really good at developing any kind of real de-radicalization programs inside the prison system.
But it's unclear whether their prison time would have been long enough for de-radicalization. Most terrorism sentences in Canada recently have been 7 years or less. Their pre-trial custody counts for time and a half, and they're entitled to statutory release after 2/3, meaning that most are getting out much sooner.
It tells us that the court system, unfortunately, does not take terrorism as a serious offense.
This Canadian just served 14 years in a U.S. prison for sending money to an extremist group. Since his deportation to Canada a couple of years ago, he's received no contact from police.
Nobody even contacted my attorney.
Legal experts note that Canadian terrorists are typically released under strict conditions. Larmond, for example, must live at a halfway house and allow police to check his phone.
You're still being sentenced in that the system is still watching you, but it gives you an opportunity to sort of reintegrate.
But in rare cases, that reintegration backfires.
Go to the back of the store!
2 recent terror attacks in London, England were committed by convicts who just got out of prison. The British government responded by banning early release for terrorism offenders, adding new urgency to the debate here in Canada, with 3 more terrorism convicts up for parole this year. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, a bullied boy with a big heart turns down Disneyland and helps others instead.
Thank you for all the support.
An update tonight on Quaden Bales. He's the 9-year-old Indigenous boy from Australia whose mother posted this heartbreaking video of him. He said he wanted to kill himself. His mom says kids were constantly bullying him because of his dwarfism. The video went viral and support poured in. A GoFundMe campaign raised more than $400,000. The plan was to send him and his mom to Disneyland, but they've turned down the trip. They say they're extremely touched by the gesture and the outpouring of support, but they've decided to donate the money instead.
So we've been talking about it, looking forward to it, but my sister said, you know what? Let's now get back to the real issue.
Quaden's family says they'll donate the money raised to 2 charities, one that helps people with dwarfism and the other that works with Indigenous youth. From bags to riches, next, a Quebec man hits the jackpot after shopping where he works. You've probably thought, what would you do if you won big? Early retirement maybe, or a never-ending vacation? Well, a grocery store bagger from Quebec is Canada's newest millionaire. Multi-millionaire, actually. He's 22, and he bought the winning ticket on Tuesday night, 20 minutes before the deadline. And as Mike Armstrong reports, he's going home with $70 million.
There's a car parked outside this grocery store, and for now, the owner's not coming to get it. One of the baggers drove it to work Wednesday morning for what ended up being his last shift. The massive check Gregory Mathieu was handed Friday morning doesn't quite do justice to the size of the jackpot he won. He and 7 members of his family are splitting $70 million. The 22-year-old's days bagging groceries for $12.55 an hour are over.
Financially, I'm good for life, and it was a huge stress for me.
Tuesday night, Mathieu was running an errand for his mom. He'd gone to another grocery store from the same chain to pick up milk and a lottery ticket for the family. The next morning, back at his store, he asked a cashier who wasn't busy to check his ticket.
And she checked it, and I couldn't believe my eyes. And I went to sit down because I couldn't talk or think.
Mathieu says once he gathered himself a bit and people stopped touching him, hoping his luck would rub off, he called his mom to say they'd won. She, understandably, figured he was messing with her.
Well, I told him, Gregory, are you freaking serious? I said, your father and I don't have a budget to miss work.
Mathieu actually passed the phone to a coworker to confirm the win and then still had to text his mother a picture of the winning ticket. That's when she started to believe.
I was shaking, I was crying.
Now, the family doesn't have any concrete plans yet, likely a big family trip. They're very close. But one purchase likely to be made soon, a new car to replace the old one. It was falling apart. That's not really a major concern anymore. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
That Zamboni driver turned emergency backup goalie also had a bit of luck on his side in his NHL debut, and now he's scored a spot in the Hockey Hall of Fame. That's the hockey stick David Ayres used to help the Carolina Hurricanes beat the Toronto Maple Leafs last weekend. It is now on display. Ayres called today's experience surreal. You'll remember he was pressed into action as the backup to the backup after 2 injuries. He's the first emergency goalie to win an NHL game, and at age 42, he's also the oldest goalie to win in his NHL debut. We love him. And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Dawna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this golden goal. 10 years ago, Sidney Crosby scored against the U.S. in overtime at the Vancouver Olympics, winning Canada's first gold in men's hockey on home soil. Who can forget it? Crosby's goal so iconic it has its own children's book. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you back here on Monday. Bye-bye.